All right, so we're diving deep into domain-driven design today. Got some excerpts here from Vaugh Vernon's Implementing Domain-Driven Design, just like you asked for.
Oh, nice.
You ready for this?
Yeah, let's do it.
Ever use software that just feels like it doesn't get you? You know?
Oh, yeah, totally.
Like it's clunky and just doesn't understand what you're trying to do? That's probably because the people who built it weren't exactly speaking the same language as the people who use it, right?
Makes sense, yeah.
And that's where DDD comes in.
Domain-driven design.
Yeah, or DDD for short. It's all about bridging that gap, making sure the software actually reflects how the business works.
Hmm.
And I've got an expert here who's going to help us unpack all the juicy bits from these excerpts.
Happy to be here.
So one of the first things Vernon talks about is this thing he calls the pain of misaligned software. What's he getting at there? Like, is it just about devs and business folks not getting along, or is there something more to it?
It's deeper than just like personality clashes, you know? It's this fundamental disconnect between how software often gets built and how the business actually operates. Vernon's argument is that when those two worlds aren't in sync, you get software that's a pain to use, a pain to maintain, and it might not even solve the real problems. He even has a name for this kind of software, Big Ball of Mud.
Big ball of mud. Wow, that sounds,
Yeah.
that sounds pretty messy.
It is very messy.
So what does that actually look like in practice? Can you give me an example?
Sure, imagine a company with this giant e-commerce system,
Okay.
but it's just this massive tangled mess.
Oh, I've seen those.
Everything crammed together. Product catalogs, orders, invoices, shipping, you name it.
Oh.
It's a nightmare for developers to work with, and probably even worse for users trying to navigate it.
Yeah, no one wins there.
Exactly. And Vernon says this kind of system often happens because the software doesn't actually reflect how the business really works.
So how does DDD help us avoid creating these big balls of mud?
One of the key ideas in DDD is bounded contexts. It's all about setting clear boundaries around different parts of the software,
Oh.
representing different parts of the business.
Got it. So instead of this one giant blob of code, we're chopping it up into smaller, more manageable pieces.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. And each of these bounded contexts, they have their own language, their own model, their own set of rules. So it's like,
Like their own little world?
yeah, kind of. Vernon uses the example of a book publisher. Think about it. A book means different things to editors, marketers, and the shipping department, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So each of those areas needs its own model, and DDD helps us keep those separate so we don't end up with everyone talking past each other.
That's a great point. It seems like this would make the software a lot easier to understand and work with.
Exactly.
Now, Vernon also talks about entities and value objects. Are these just like database terms, or is there something more to them in DDD?
More to them for sure. They're about building a model that truly reflects the business, you know?
Like, think about how you'd model a customer. You want to make sure their identity stays the same, even if they change their address or phone number.
Right, that makes sense.
That's an example of an entity. The identity stays consistent, even if some details change.
I see.
And then value objects, those are defined by their attributes. It doesn't matter which specific instance it is.
So like,
Two $10 bills are equal, even if they have different serial numbers.
so it's the value that matters, not the individual thing itself.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, that clarifies it. So we've got bounded contexts, entities, value objects, but how do we actually bring all this together?
Right.
How do we go from these concepts to real working software?
That's where strategic design and tactical design come in. Strategic design is like the high-level blueprint, mapping out the bounded contexts and how they relate.
Okay.
And then tactical design is where you roll up your sleeves and actually build the components using patterns and techniques to implement what you defined in the strategic design.
So it's like having an architect who designs the building and then the builders who actually put it together.
That's a good analogy.
Vernon also mentions aggregates. What are those and why are they so important?
Aggregates help us manage complexity and keep things consistent in our model.
Okay.
They're basically clusters of objects that we treat as one unit.
Okay.
But Vernon warns against having giant aggregates that try to include too many things. It can become a mess.
What's wrong with having a big aggregate, though? Doesn't it make sense to keep related things together?
You'd think so, but it can cause problems down the line.
Oh, really?
He gives the example of a product aggregate that includes backlog items, and then each of those has a bunch of estimation log entries.
Oh, I see where this is going.
It becomes really hard to manage, and it can slow things down if you're always loading tons of data you don't need.
So it's about finding the right balance, grouping things that make sense, but avoiding those massive clusters.
All right, that makes sense. Now, how do these aggregates and these bounded contexts, how do they actually talk to each other?
Yeah, good question.
It's not like they exist in isolation, right?
Right, that's where event-driven architecture comes in.
Event-driven architecture.
Yeah, so it's a way to design systems where different parts communicate by publishing and subscribing to events.
Oh, okay.
Like when a new order gets placed, it could publish an order-placed event,
Got it.
and then other parts of the system, like the shipping context, can subscribe to that event and take action.
So it's like a chain reaction where one action triggers a bunch of other events throughout the system.
Exactly.
Interesting. Now, Vernon is very clear that repositories are not the same as those simple data access objects.
Right, not at all.
What makes them so special in DDD then?
Repositories give us a way to access data, but from the perspective of our domain model. So instead of thinking about tables and rows in a database, we think about collections of our domain objects, our aggregates.
The repository lets us retrieve and persist those aggregates without cluttering up our model with database code.
So it's like having a special librarian for our domain objects. They know where everything is and can fetch it for us.
That's a great way to put it, yeah.
Okay, I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together.
Good, good.
But how do we ensure that all these separate bounded contexts can actually work together smoothly? It seems like having all these independent units could create new problems.
That's a valid point. It's not enough to just draw lines and hope for the best.
Right.
Vernon spends a good chunk of the book talking about different ways to integrate these bounded contexts. Options like RESTful services, messaging, and setting up clear contracts between the contexts. It's all about picking the right tool for the job.
Got it. And then to manage all these interactions, Vernon talks about application services acting as the orchestrators.
Yeah.
What's their role exactly? Are they just adding another layer of complexity?
They're the glue, but they don't contain business logic. They handle things like transactions, security, and coordinating between the contexts, but the important decisions stay within the domain model.
So they're like the stage managers, making sure everything runs smoothly, but not actually writing the script.
Perfect analogy.
Vernon briefly mentions A plus ES combining aggregates with event sourcing. Is that just like a fancier version of event-driven architecture?
It takes things further, yeah. With event sourcing, every change to an aggregate gets captured as an event, creating this complete history.
Wow, so it's like having a time machine for our software.
Exactly.
We can go back and see how we got to a certain state. That could be super valuable for debugging and stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
It seems like there's a lot to unpack there, but we're running a bit short on time for this segment.
Sure.
We'll dig deeper into Vernon's implementing domain-driven design after a short break.
That's good.
We've covered a ton today already.
Yeah.
It's clear that DDD is more than just some technical patterns. It's a whole different way of thinking about software. One that really emphasizes collaboration and understanding the business.
Couldn't agree more.
We'll be back soon to continue our deep dive.
Looking forward to it.
Welcome back to our deep dive into domain-driven design.
It's great to be back.
So far, we've seen how DDD can help us steer clear of that big ball of mud situation and build software that actually reflects the business. We've talked about boundaries, bounded contexts, entities, value objects, even application services.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. But how do we actually put all this into practice?
Right.
Vernon gives us a kind of roadmap in his book.
He does.
And it starts with this thing called the ubiquitous language. What is that all about?
The ubiquitous language. It's all about communication, really.
Yeah.
Creating a shared vocabulary that everyone on the team understands.
So not just developers, but the domain experts, the business folks, everyone.
Exactly. And it's not just about using the same words. It's about having a shared understanding of the concepts, the processes, the rules of the business.
So instead of developers throwing around all this technical jargon, we're all speaking the same language, a language that reflects the real world.
That's the goal. It's about breaking down those communication barriers and building a truly collaborative environment.
And once we have that shared language, then what?
Then we can start mapping out the key concepts in our domain and translating those into code.
So that's where those tactical patterns come in. The entities, value objects, aggregates, all that stuff.
Precisely.
Vernon also talks about experimentation and iteration. It's not about getting it perfect on the first try, right?
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
DDD is very much aligned with agile principles. We start with a small model, and we refine it as we learn more.
So it's an ongoing process.
Very much so. A process of discovery and improvement.
Makes sense. Earlier, we talked about repositories being that bridge between our domain model and the database.
Right.
Vernon spends a whole chapter on this. Why does he put so much emphasis on repositories? What makes them so crucial?
Repositories play a critical role in maintaining the integrity of our domain model. They let us retrieve and persist our aggregates without tying our domain logic to a specific database technology.
So we can swap out the database if we need to, without messing everything up.
Exactly. He gives examples of implementing repositories using different approaches, from traditional ORMs to NoSQL databases even.
So it's about choosing the right tool for the job, but always with the goal of keeping our domain model clean and independent.
That's it.
And speaking of independence, we mentioned that bounded contexts need to talk to each other.
Right.
We touched on RESTful services and messaging, but Vernon also mentioned something called open host service. What's that all about? Is it like just opening the doors and letting anyone in?
Not quite. It's more like setting clear boundaries and expectations for how other systems can interact with our bounded context.
So we're being good neighbors, making it easy for others to work with us.
Exactly. We define a clear API, document it well, and make it easy for others to integrate with us.
But what about those neighbors who might not be so well behaved?
You mean?
Those legacy systems that might have different models, different languages, all sorts of quirks.
That's where anti-corruption layers come in.
Anti-corruption layers.
They act as a shield between our nice, clean DDD model and the potentially messy world of external systems.
Okay.
Imagine you have to integrate with a legacy system that has a very different way of representing customers.
I can imagine, yeah.
An anti-corruption layer would translate those concepts and data into a format our DDD model can understand.
So it's like a translator smoothing over the differences between two very different systems.
A very good analogy.
We talked about the different types of clients our software might have: web apps, mobile apps, even those batch processes running in the background.
Right, different clients, different needs.
How do we cater to those different needs without messing up our domain model?
Data transfer objects, or DTOs.
DTOs. Okay, tell me more.
They let us tailor the data we send to each client without exposing the internals of our domain model.
So we're giving each client exactly what they need in a format that works for them.
Exactly. It's all about presenting the data in a way that makes sense for each client.
That's pretty smart. Vernon goes deeper into event-driven architecture, talking about different messaging patterns like publish-subscribe, and pipes, and filters.
Oh yeah, messaging gets pretty interesting.
It sounds like it can get pretty complex. Are there any pitfalls we should be aware of?
One common challenge is dealing with duplicate messages.
Oh, that makes sense. In a distributed system, things can get out of sync.
Exactly. Vernon talks about strategies for handling those situations, ensuring our systems stay resilient even when things go wrong.
So it's like having a good spam filter for our software. We don't want those unwanted messages clogging things up.
Precisely.
Now, Vernon doesn't shy away from some of the more advanced DDD techniques,
He does not.
like event sourcing
Right.
and CQRS.
Ah, yes, those are powerful concepts.
Command query responsibility segregation. That's a mouthful.
It is, but it's a powerful idea.
What are those all about, and how do they take DDD to the next level?
Event sourcing is all about capturing every change to the system as an event. This gives us a complete audit trail, which is super valuable for debugging, auditing, even replaying events to rebuild the state of the system.
So it's like having a DVR for our software.
Exactly. We can rewind and replay events to see exactly what happened.
That's amazing. And what about CQRS?
CQRS is about separating the logic for reading and writing data,
Oh, okay.
so we can optimize each path for its specific needs.
So it's like having separate lanes for reading and writing data, preventing those traffic jams and bottlenecks.
Exactly. It's all about improving performance and scalability.
These concepts sound incredibly powerful, but also pretty complex. Does Vernon offer any guidance on how to implement them?
He does. He provides concrete examples of how to implement event sourcing and CQRS using different technologies.
So he doesn't just leave us hanging with all these abstract ideas.
Not at all. He gives us practical advice on how to put these concepts into practice.
That's great. We've talked a lot about modeling the domain, but what about testing?
Testing is essential, especially in complex systems.
How do we make sure our DDD applications are actually working properly?
Vernon emphasizes unit testing our aggregates and using integration tests to verify the interactions between bounded contexts.
So it's a multi-layered approach.
It is. We need to make sure individual components work correctly and that they all play nicely together.
And Vernon doesn't just focus on the present. He also talks about the future of DDD.
He does. He sees DDD continuing to evolve and adapt to new technologies.
What kind of trends does he highlight?
He talks about microservices and serverless architectures and how DDD principles can be applied in those contexts.
So DDD can adapt to different environments and thrive in different ecosystems.
That's the beauty of it. It's a set of principles that can be applied in many different situations.
It's been an incredible journey exploring Vernon's implementing domain-driven design with you.
I've enjoyed it.
We've covered so much ground. It's clear that DDD is more than just a bunch of technical patterns. It's a philosophy.
A way of thinking about software.
But before we wrap up this deep dive, I'd love to get your perspective on the most valuable takeaways for someone who wants to start applying DDD.
Sure. Happy to share some thoughts.
We've really gone deep with DDD, from high-level strategic design to the nitty-gritty of tactical patterns.
It's been quite the exploration.
What stands out to you as the most valuable thing someone could take away from all this if they want to start using DDD?
You know, I think what's so compelling about DDD is how it shifts the focus.
How so?
It's not just about cranking out code, it's about understanding the business at a deeper level.
Yeah.
Building software that actually mirrors those real-world processes, speaking the language of the business.
That's a powerful concept.
It is. And Vernon doesn't just throw theory at us.
Right.
He gives us practical tools to actually make it happen.
Yeah, he has all those real-world examples and code snippets.
Exactly. It helps make it all click.
He doesn't shy away from the human side of things either.
Oh, no, not at all.
Like getting everyone on board with DDD, working with those domain experts.
Collaborating effectively, yeah.
It's not just a technical thing, it's a team effort.
Definitely. And he tackles those tough questions, too.
Oh yeah, like what to do about those legacy systems.
Right, how to deal with duplicate messages when everything's distributed.
How to test these complex DDD apps.
All important stuff.
And I appreciate that he emphasizes that learning and experimenting.
Oh, absolutely.
DDD isn't about finding that one perfect solution. It's a process.
It's a journey.
Yeah, a journey of discovering and refining.
You've got to be willing to embrace change.
Adapt.
Keep looking for ways to improve those models and the code.
It's like we're exploring new territory with Vernon as our guide.
I like that analogy.
We've covered so much in this deep dive, but it feels like we've just scratched the surface.
There's always more to explore with DDD.
Always something new to learn.
And that's what makes it so exciting.
Absolutely. So for our listeners who want to learn more, Vernon's book is an excellent starting point.
It is.
But don't stop there.
Oh no, there's a whole DDD community out there.
Conferences, workshops, tons of resources online.
Definitely. Connect with other people, share your experiences, learn from each other.
And DDD isn't just for software developers, right?
Right. Anyone who cares about building better software can benefit from these ideas.
So if you're ready to build software that really makes a difference, give DDD a try.
I highly recommend it.
Well, that wraps up our deep dive into domain-driven design.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope you found it insightful.
And maybe even a bit inspiring.
Until next time, keep exploring and keep building amazing things.
Happy coding.